It looks like 2024 might just be the year of Wayland on the Linux desktop, at least if GNOME has anything to say about it. So recently, some merge requests were opened in the GNOME repository that would completely remove support for the X11 session. So for a while now, GNOME has had both Wayland and X11 support, where you could choose between either of the two at login, and the desktop environment was basically built with support for both in mind. However, it looks like with the next release of GNOME, that's going to be changing, and Wayland is going to be the only way to go. So let's take a look at what's actually changing. So here's the merge request on the GNOME GitLab repository. So as they say, it's only the first step. So if you look at what's actually changed here, it's removing a desktop entry for the session. It's removing some stuff related to the configuration, and then it's removing, just copying over that desktop entry. So really, this MR, all it's doing is just disabling the configuration option, or the option that allows you to select the X11 session from your login screen. It doesn't actually remove support from it from the rest of the desktop environment. That's coming in a separate merge request, one that will probably take much longer to get merged, and is a lot more extensive. But even on this first one, there's quite a bit of discussion already. We have comment by this person who is a maintainer of GIMP and a GNOME member, saying that basically changing completely to Wayland is just not acceptable because things aren't ready. GIMP isn't ready, and forcing this change so soon would just lead them to recommend other desktop environments that fully support X11. In particular, they mentioned that the protocol for color management is not available on GIMP or on Wayland, which GIMP, of course, needs because it is a tool for working with images. And if you can imagine, a tool like that would definitely need color management support. That's something that's very important to them. So, of course, there is an implementation for Mutter, which is one of the compositors, I believe. Actually, not 100% sure exactly what it is. Let's see here. It is, yeah, it's a display server, X11 window manager, and compositor library. So there is an implementation for it, but the official Wayland protocol hasn't been stabilized yet. And so just to give some background on that, Wayland, one of the ways in which it differs from X11 is that it is built on a set of protocols that at their core are very minimal. They don't implement much. And there are these extensions, extended protocols basically, that provide certain additional features that previously on something like X11 were all just bundled into the main protocol itself. And the other thing is, instead of there being a single reference display server implementation like on X11 that realistically 99.9% of people use at this point, there are multiple. So what this means is that even though Mutter implements it, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's standardized and that other compositors and other Wayland display servers will implement it the same way. Which of course means that this might lead to a fragmentation problem where you have all these different implementations, and if it gets to the point where different implementations of the protocol and different ideas for what the protocol should be actually get implemented into competing display servers, then that would make it very difficult to actually standardize. Which is one of the complaints, actually, at least that I have about Wayland. I think some other people might have as well, is that it takes a long time for these extensions to get standardized to the point that these compositors and display servers end up having to implement non-standard things and then just hope that eventually, when the protocol arrives, it will be similar to what they have, so that software that currently relies on that behavior doesn't break. Another interesting comment on this merge request is down here by Michael Catanzaro, which is that even though that this actually removes support from the desktop environment officially, you can still put it back. I mean, it's just a text file, right? So this merge request would be fairly uncontroversial, apart from the things that I mentioned, to make it in. And it doesn't actually remove support from it in the way that some people might think. So, because of that, it's being used as a way to, quote, make sure developers understand that GNOME won't support X11 for much longer. And so that should just make it clear that this is not an official development target anymore. So there won't be any new development on features for X11, at least from the GNOME side. And, well, to be honest, I don't think anyone's actually implementing new features in the display server itself. But for users, this also should serve as an indication of what will be coming in the future, but it doesn't necessarily remove support completely just yet. So perhaps if GNOME is packaged by some distribution that wants stability, they want their existing users to have a 100% rock solid experience that they know will work regardless of what hardware that they use. For instance, I know on Wayland, NVIDIA graphics drivers have some issues. So for those users, the distribution can just trivially add back this file, right? Like that's something that distributions do, right? It's make these kinds of configuration tweaks, and this is really just changing the default configuration. I mean, let's be honest, right? All this does is just remove this desktop entry file. And I think we can agree that that's not really part of the core code that supports it. It's really just a configuration that's included by default. And so I wouldn't be surprised if distributions that want X11 to stay around for a little bit longer, if they add this back in. As long as the follow-up merge request, which is 99 over here, that actually removes support from it, doesn't get merged. And it looks like this one will have a lot more in-depth discussions and a lot more controversy, most likely, when it actually gets closer to merging. But it looks like that will be in the future for now. Perhaps sometime in 2024. I don't know. I don't work on GNOME or on any other desktop environment, so I'm not exactly sure how long these things will take. And it's kind of hard to tell with how many discussions are still open and things that need to get ironed out. But this move isn't completely unprecedented. So Fedora actually announced in September, so that's about 3 weeks ago, I think, that they are dropping X11 session support from GNOME. So, like I said, right, desktop environments, they might implement something, but distributions might change a configuration option. And so Fedora was going to be removing the option of letting users use X11. And they actually did a similar thing for KDE as well about a week before that, which is to drop the X11 session entirely. So with KDE Plasma 6, its development it's been ongoing for a little while, and it will release next year. Yes, aiming for a release in early February. And this release is pretty much focusing entirely on Wayland. So as far as I know, X11 is still supported. Let's see if there's any information on that. Well, whether it's supported or not, the focus of this release is absolutely going to be on Wayland and making sure that that's going to be the more stable of the two. And as for issues on X11, those might just be kind of a side low priority thing. And so this move isn't unprecedented. I mean, it's been moving in this direction for a while. Wayland has been around since I think 2012, which makes it fairly Well, it's taken a long time to get mainstream adoption. Let's put it that way. Just because it does so many things so differently from X11. That's as opposed to something like Pipewire, which was adopted very quickly because it was essentially a drop-in replacement. But with Wayland, things are done completely differently, and that requires, adjusting the software that actually uses those features that used to be there in X11 to work with Wayland now. So that's going to be a fairly big change, but it looks like 2024 might finally be the year that Wayland takes over the Linux desktop. So I don't know when the year of the Linux desktop is, but it looks like 2024 will be the year of Wayland on Linux. And just as a final note, I'm really looking forward to the release of the Cosmic desktop environment, which hopefully will land sometime in 2024. We're not really sure. Um, if you're not familiar, Cosmic is the desktop environment being developed by System 76, who make Pop OS, as well as some hardware that they sell. Previously, Pop OS, the Cosmic desktop environment on Pop OS, was just some additional things on top of GNOME, but they decided to write a new desktop environment completely from scratch in Rust, and they've been working on it for a while now. By a while, I mean, I think the project started around the beginning of 2022, so about a year and a half at this point. And hopefully it'll release in 2024. And of course, this being a new desktop environment focused on, the future instead of the past, is going to be focused primarily on Wayland. So it uses the Wayland display server. And let's see, when was this blog post posted? Beginning of 2023. Only then did they add support for X Wayland, which allows backwards compatibility with applications that only support X11. And so, of course, here, again, Wayland is going to be a first-class citizen, and X11 is really just going to be an afterthought. So it's not going to be supported, and for applications, they'll be using this compatibility layer, which is X Wayland. So that's it. It looks like we might finally be getting rid of the behemoth that is X11. I myself haven't worked on it, but I've heard from developers, or rather, I've read some of their testimonies, that it just became such a nightmare to work with that they wanted to start from scratch, which is where Wayland came from. And so it looks like we'll be getting a new, modern, modular display protocol in 2024. Lots to look forward to in the open source community.